There is something deeply unsettling yet strangely peaceful about the idea of a ship disappearing into the endless blue. Picture yourself standing on a quiet shore at dusk, watching the horizon where the sky meets the water, and somewhere out there, beyond your sight, a vessel that once carried hundreds of souls simply fades away without a trace. No explosion echoes across the waves. No debris washes up on distant beaches. Just silence, vast and complete, as if the ocean itself has decided to keep a secret. Throughout history, ships have vanished in ways that defy explanation, leaving behind families who waited for loved ones who would never return, and mysteries that have haunted sailors and scholars for generations. These are not stories of dramatic battles or violent storms that left obvious wreckage. These are the tales of ghost fleets, ships that sailed into treacherous waters and were never seen again, as if they crossed an invisible threshold and stepped out of our world entirely. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and let your mind drift, we will journey together through these mysteries, not with alarm or fear, but with quiet wonder and gentle curiosity, exploring what happened to these vessels and the people aboard them, and why certain waters seem to hold such dangerous secrets. The ocean has always been humanity's most mysterious companion, a friend and adversary that gives life and takes it away with equal indifference. For thousands of years, people have built ships and ventured onto those shifting blue plains, carrying trade goods and passengers, dreams and desperate hopes, trusting in wood and canvas and later steel and steam to keep them safe above the depths. But the sea is vast beyond human comprehension, covering more than 70% of our planet's surface, and beneath its often tranquil appearance lie currents and pressures and forces we are only beginning to understand. In certain regions, where geography and weather and ocean patterns converge, conditions become so treacherous that ships have disappeared with disturbing regularity, leaving behind only questions that echo through time. These vanishings share common threads that make them particularly haunting. Vessels in good condition, experienced crews, no apparent warning of disaster, and absolutely no trace left behind. Unlike shipwrecks where survivors tell tales or wreckage confirms what happened, these ghost ships simply cease to exist in our records, as if they sailed beyond the edge of the world. As we explore these stories together in this calm and gentle way, we will visit several of history's most dangerous waters, meet the ships and sailors who vanished there, and consider the theories that have emerged to explain these disappearances, always keeping our tone soft and thoughtful, perfect for letting your mind wander and rest. The nature of vanishing. When a ship disappears without a trace, it leaves a particular kind of wound in the world. Families wait at docks that remain empty. Letters are written to addresses that will never receive them. Children grow up with the faint memory of a parent who went to sea one morning and never came home, not because anyone saw them perish, but because they simply stopped existing in any recordable way. This type of loss is different from other tragedies because there is no closure, no body to mourn, no wreckage to prove what happened, only an absence that grows heavier with each passing year. Throughout maritime history, thousands of vessels have been lost at sea, but the vast majority leave some evidence behind. Floating debris, oil slicks, distress calls, lifeboats, bodies recovered by passing ships, or at least witnesses who saw the final moments. The ghost fleet vanishings we are exploring tonight are different because they offer none of these comforts. The ship is simply their one moment, recorded in a logbook or seen by another vessel, and then gone the next, with the ocean holding its secrets close. These disappearances have happened in specific regions where conditions conspire to create exceptional danger, places where the sea floor drops away into trenches of unimaginable depth, where weather patterns collide with peculiar violence, where ocean currents create invisible rivers of force that can pull a ship off course, or where magnetic anomalies confuse navigation instruments and lead crews into peril they cannot escape. The psychology of these vanishings has haunted sailors for as long as humans have ventured onto the ocean. In port cities around the world, in taverns and harbors and sailing clubs, mariners have shared stories of dangerous waters, passing knowledge down through generations, warning each other about regions where ships go missing with unusual frequency. These warnings carry a weight that goes beyond simple caution. They speak to a primal fear that humans have always held for the ocean, a recognition that we are visitors in an environment fundamentally hostile to our survival, where we float on the surface by grace of human engineering, but remain always vulnerable to forces far greater than ourselves. When a ship vanishes without explanation, it reminds every sailor that the same fate could befall them, that despite all our technology and knowledge, we remain small and fragile against the vastness of the sea. Yet sailors continue to venture out, drawn by necessity and livelihood, by the romance of the ocean and the freedom of the horizon, accepting the risks because the sea calls to something deep within certain souls. As we move through these stories together, we will honor both those who vanished and those who continue to sail, recognizing the courage it takes to trust your life to a vessel on an ocean that has swallowed so many before you. The Bermuda Triangle and its lost ships. Perhaps no region on Earth has captured the imagination regarding mysterious ship vanishings quite like the Bermuda Triangle, that roughly defined area of the Atlantic Ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. This stretch of water has become synonymous with unexplained disappearances, entering popular culture as a place where natural laws seem to bend and vessels simply cease to exist. While some of the mystique surrounding the Bermuda Triangle has been exaggerated or sensationalized over the years, there remains a core truth that this region has witnessed a significant number of ships and aircraft vanishing under puzzling circumstances. The waters here are among the most heavily traveled in the world, connecting major ports and serving as a thoroughfare for both commercial and private vessels, which means increased traffic naturally leads to more incidents. However, even accounting for this higher volume, researchers have noted patterns of disappearances that seem to defy easy explanation. Cases where ships in good repair with experienced crews vanished in calm weather without sending distress signals or leaving wreckage that could be recovered and studied. As we explore some of these specific vanishings, we will keep our voices calm and our approach thoughtful, looking at what is known and what remains mystery, avoiding sensational claims while respecting the genuine strangeness of these events. One of the most famous disappearances in this region involves the USS Cyclops, a massive naval cargo ship that vanished in March of 1918 while traveling from Barbados to Baltimore. The Cyclops was not a small vessel easily overwhelmed by unexpected weather. She measured over 500 feet in length, displaced nearly 20,000 tons, and had been serving the United States Navy reliably for years, carrying cargo and passengers across these same waters many times before. On her final voyage, she carried a crew of 306 men along with a cargo of manganese, or a heavy mineral used in steel production. The ship departed Barbados on March 4th, and after that, she was never seen or heard from again. No distress call was ever received. No wreckage was ever found despite extensive searches. No bodies ever washed ashore. The Cyclops and everyone aboard simply vanished into the Atlantic as completely as if they had never existed. The disappearance became one of the single largest losses of life in United States naval history, not directly involving combat. And the lack of any evidence about what happened has made it an enduring mystery that still puzzles naval historians and maritime experts today. Theories have ranged from structural failure that caused the ship to sink rapidly, to German submarine attack during World War I, to sudden violent weather that could have capsized even such a large vessel. Yet none of these theories fully explain why no wreckage was ever recovered or why the ship never sent any distress signal, given that she was equipped with radio communication. The story of the Cyclops reminds us how suddenly and completely the ocean can claim even our largest and most confident creations. The men aboard that ship woke up that morning in Barbados expecting to arrive in Baltimore within a week, perhaps thinking of families they would see, of shore leave they would enjoy, of the ordinary routines of naval service during wartime. They could not have known that they were sailing into oblivion, that within days they would all be gone without a trace, remembered only as names on a memorial and a mystery that would outlive anyone who knew them. Their families waited at docks and ports all along the East Coast, waiting for news that would never come, eventually receiving only the terrible notification that the ship was missing and presumed lost. For years afterward, there were reported sightings of the Cyclops by other vessels, desperate hopes that perhaps she had been damaged and was limping to port, or had been captured by enemy forces and would eventually return. But these hopes faded as time passed without any confirmation, and eventually the Navy declared all hands lost, closing the book on a mystery that has never been solved. The Cyclops remains out there somewhere, perhaps resting on the ocean floor in the deep trenches that cut through this region, her hull slowly being claimed by rust and sea life, a tomb for 306 men whose final moments remain unknown. Another vessel that vanished in these waters under similarly mysterious circumstances was the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a tanker that disappeared in February of 1963 while carrying a cargo of molten sulfur from Beaumont, Texas to Norfolk, Virginia. The Marine Sulphur Queen was a converted World War II tanker that had been modified to carry sulfur heated to liquid form, a dangerous cargo that required constant monitoring and careful handling. The ship had a crew of 39 men, many of them experienced merchant mariners who had spent years working these routes. On February 2nd, the ship sent a routine radio message reporting her position about 200 miles off the coast of Florida. After that message, she was never heard from again. When the ship failed to arrive in Norfolk on schedule, Coast Guard vessels and aircraft began searching the area, but found almost nothing. A few life jackets were recovered bearing the ship's name, along with some small pieces of debris that might have come from her, but no lifeboats, no bodies, no oil slick, no wreckage substantial enough to confirm what had happened. The Marine Sulphur Queen had simply vanished with all hands, leaving behind only the faintest traces of her existence. The disappearance of the Marine Sulphur Queen was particularly troubling because the ship had a history of structural problems and safety concerns. Inspections before her final voyage had noted cracks in the hull and issues with the heating system used to keep the sulfur in liquid form. Some crew members had reportedly expressed concerns about the ship's seaworthiness, though whether these concerns were serious enough to explain her sudden vanishing remains unclear. One theory suggests that the ship broke apart catastrophically, perhaps due to structural failure or an explosion related to the volatile sulfur cargo, sinking so rapidly that the crew had no time to send a distress call or launch lifeboats. This would explain the lack of survivors and the minimal debris, as a ship sinking in deep water takes most of its contents down with it, leaving little to float to the surface. However, this theory still leaves questions unanswered, particularly about why more debris was not recovered and why no bodies were found. The Gulf Stream, a powerful current that flows through this region, could have carried wreckage and remains far from the site of the sinking, scattering evidence across hundreds of miles of ocean and making recovery nearly impossible. Yet the families of the 39 men aboard the Marine Sulphur Queen were left with the same terrible uncertainty that has haunted so many who lose loved ones at sea. Not knowing exactly what happened, unable to properly grieve because there was no confirmation, no bodies to bury, no clear moment to mark as the end. The Bermuda Triangle has claimed many other vessels over the centuries, from small pleasure craft to larger merchant ships, each vanishing adding to the region's dark reputation. Some of these disappearances can be explained by known hazards. The area is prone to sudden violent storms that can develop with little warning, particularly during hurricane season when systems moving off the African coast gather strength as they cross the warm Atlantic waters. The region also contains some of the deepest waters in the Atlantic, including the Puerto Rico Trench, which drops to depths exceeding 8,000 meters. A ship sinking into such depths would be nearly impossible to locate and recover, even with modern sonar and submersible technology. Additionally, the Gulf Stream creates strong currents that can quickly move wreckage far from the site of a sinking, further complicating search and recovery efforts. Magnetic anomalies have also been documented in this region, which could interfere with compass readings and lead to navigation errors that put ships into danger. Methane hydrates, frozen deposits of natural gas on the ocean floor, have been proposed as another possible explanation. If large amounts of methane were suddenly released from the seafloor, perhaps triggered by underwater landslides or seismic activity, the gas could reduce the water's density enough that a ship would lose buoyancy and sink rapidly. While this methane eruption theory remains controversial and unproven, it offers an intriguing possible explanation for how ships could disappear so completely and quickly. Despite all these rational explanations, the Bermuda Triangle continues to hold a place in our collective imagination as a region where the normal rules seem not to apply, where ships and planes vanish in ways that feel almost supernatural. This perception says something important about humanity's relationship with the ocean. No matter how much we learn about oceanography and meteorology, no matter how advanced our technology becomes, we remain aware at some deep level that the sea can still take us without warning or explanation. The ocean covers most of our planet but remains largely unexplored, its deepest reaches more alien to us than the surface of the moon. We have mapped the ocean floor in only the crudest detail, leaving vast regions unknown and uninvestigated. In such an environment, mysterious disappearances feel almost inevitable, reminders that we have not yet mastered this realm and perhaps never will. As we move forward in our journey through history's ghost fleets, we carry with us the stories of the Cyclops and the Marine Sulphur Queen and the many other vessels claimed by these waters, honoring their memory by seeking to understand what might have happened, even as we acknowledge that some questions may never be answered. The Devil's Sea and the Dragon's Triangle. On the opposite side of the world from the Bermuda Triangle lies another region notorious for mysterious ship vanishings, known variously as the Devil's Sea, the Dragon's Triangle, or Ma no Umi in Japanese. This area of the Pacific Ocean, roughly located south of Japan between the coast and various Pacific islands, has its own dark history of vessels that sailed out and never returned. The region has been feared by sailors for centuries, long before modern maritime traffic made these waters busy highways of commerce. Japanese fishing vessels have been particularly vulnerable, with numerous small boats disappearing over the decades, their crews never heard from again. While some of these losses can be attributed to the harsh conditions that fishing crews face, working in dangerous weather far from shore in small vessels, there have been enough unexplained vanishings in this region that it has earned its ominous reputation and drawn the attention of researchers trying to understand what makes these waters so treacherous. The most notorious series of disappearances in the Devil's Sea occurred in the early 1950s, when several Japanese fishing boats vanished within a relatively short period, prompting the Japanese government to declare the area a danger zone and launch an investigation. In 1952 alone, at least 5 vessels went missing, including the Keo Maru No. 5, a research ship sent by the Japanese government specifically to study the region and determine what was causing the disappearances. The Keo Maru No. 5 carried a crew of 31 scientists and sailors, equipped with instruments to measure magnetic fields, ocean currents, and underwater volcanic activity. The ship was well maintained and commanded by experienced officers who were aware of the region's dangers and proceeded with appropriate caution. Yet on September 24, 1952, the Keo Maru No. 5 sent a distress call indicating they were experiencing some kind of difficulty, and then communication ceased entirely. The ship was never seen again, and despite search efforts, no wreckage or survivors were ever recovered. The loss of a government research vessel sent specifically to investigate the disappearances, which then became itself a victim of the same mysterious phenomenon, was deeply unsettling and added to the region's fearsome reputation. The Dragon's Triangle, as it is sometimes called, sits in an area of intense geological activity where several tectonic plates meet and interact, creating conditions for frequent underwater earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The Izu Islands, a volcanic chain stretching south from Japan, mark the eastern edge of this region, and new volcanic islands have been known to suddenly emerge from the seafloor here, while others have disappeared just as quickly, reclaimed by the ocean. This intense volcanic and seismic activity means that underwater eruptions could occur without warning, potentially creating sudden violent disturbances that could damage or sink ships. A volcanic eruption beneath a vessel could cause the water to superheat, create massive explosions of steam and gases, or trigger underwater shockwaves powerful enough to rupture a hull. Such an event could happen so quickly that a crew would have no time to send a distress call or abandon ship, explaining why vessels might vanish without a trace. Additionally, the release of volcanic gases, particularly carbon dioxide or hydrogen sulfide, could create pockets of water with reduced oxygen content, potentially incapacitating crew members who breathed in the contaminated air or even causing physiological effects that impaired their ability to respond to an emergency. Magnetic anomalies have also been detected in the Dragon's Triangle, similar to those reported in the Bermuda Triangle, which could interfere with compass navigation and lead ships off course into dangerous waters. Before the widespread adoption of GPS and satellite navigation, ships relied heavily on magnetic compasses to maintain their heading, and any interference with these instruments could be disorienting and dangerous, particularly in areas with limited visibility due to fog or storms. A ship led off course by faulty compass readings could find itself in waters shallower than expected, running aground on hidden reefs or underwater volcanic formations, or could be pushed by currents into regions where search and rescue efforts would never think to look. These magnetic disturbances might be caused by deposits of magnetic minerals on the ocean floor, by the movement of magma beneath the seabed, or by other geological processes that we are only beginning to understand. Whatever their cause, they represent another hazard in waters already made dangerous by other factors, compounding the risks faced by vessels crossing this region. The fishing boats that have vanished in the Devil's Sea were typically smaller vessels, more vulnerable to harsh weather and heavy seas than large merchant ships or naval vessels. Fishing crews often work in challenging conditions, venturing far from shore to reach productive fishing grounds, and are sometimes caught by weather that develops faster than they can return to port. A sudden typhoon or severe storm could easily overwhelm a small fishing boat, sinking her so quickly that the crew has no time to send a distress call or deploy life rafts. The bodies and wreckage from such a sinking might be scattered by currents and wind, making recovery unlikely, particularly if the sinking occurred far from regular shipping lanes where other vessels might happen upon debris. Yet the clustering of disappearances in this specific region, and the loss of larger vessels like the KO Maru No. 5, suggests that more than just bad weather and small boat vulnerability are at play. There seems to be something about this particular stretch of ocean that increases risk in ways we do not fully understand, whether that is geological, meteorological, or some combination of factors that creates a perfect storm of danger. Japanese sailors and fishermen have shared stories about the Devil's Sea for generations, passing down warnings about specific areas to avoid and times of year when the danger seems greatest. These traditional knowledge systems, built from centuries of experience and observation, often contain wisdom that modern science only later confirms. When local mariners avoid certain waters or show particular respect and caution when transiting a region, they are drawing on accumulated knowledge of many lifetimes, incorporating lessons learned from those who did not return. While we may not know the exact scientific mechanisms that make a region dangerous, the pattern of losses tells its own story, one that is written in the absence of ships and crews who ventured out with hope and confidence and never came home. These traditional warnings represent a kind of collective memory, a way of honoring those who were lost by trying to ensure that others do not suffer the same fate. And they remind us that knowledge passed down through generations, even when it lacks scientific precision, often contains deep truth. The investigation launched by the Japanese government after the loss of the KO Maru No. 5 ultimately proved inconclusive. Researchers examined weather patterns, ocean currents, magnetic anomalies, and volcanic activity, but could not identify a single cause that explained all the disappearances. Instead, they found a region where multiple hazards overlapped, creating an environment of compounded risk where ships faced dangers from several directions at once. The government's decision to declare the area a danger zone and discourage unnecessary travel through these waters was a practical response to a pattern of losses that, even if not fully understood, was clearly real. In the decades since, ship traffic through the Devil's Sea has continued, as modern navigation technology and better weather forecasting have made the region somewhat safer to transit. But the area retains its ominous reputation, and sailors who must pass through these waters do so with heightened awareness and respect for the ocean's power. The mysteries of the Dragon's Triangle remind us that even in our modern age of satellites and computers, there are still places on Earth where nature remains unpredictable and dangerous, where the forces at play are larger and more complex than our ability to control or fully comprehend them. The Sargasso Sea and its stillness. Moving back across the Pacific and into the Atlantic again, we encounter a region of the ocean so different from the violent waters we have been discussing that it seems to belong to another world entirely, yet it too has claimed its share of ships in mysterious and unsettling ways. The Sargasso Sea is a vast area of the North Atlantic Ocean, roughly bounded by ocean currents rather than by land, distinguished by its unusual stillness and by the floating mats of sargassum seaweed that give the region its name. Unlike most oceanic regions defined by proximity to continents or islands, the Sargasso Sea is bounded by currents. The Gulf Stream to the west, the North Atlantic Current to the north, the Canary Current to the east, and the Atlantic Equatorial Current to the south. These surrounding currents flow in a clockwise pattern, creating a relatively calm region in the center where water movement is minimal. Winds are often light or absent entirely, and the ocean takes on an eerie stillness that unnerved sailors throughout the Age of Sail and continues to fascinate oceanographers today. For sailing ships dependent on wind to make progress, the Sargasso Sea represented a potentially deadly trap. Vessels could enter this region pushed by favorable winds, only to find themselves becalmed, sitting motionless on water as smooth as glass while their supplies of food and water slowly dwindled. The sailing ship era produced numerous accounts of vessels trapped in the Sargasso for weeks, their crews growing desperate as they waited for wind that might never come, sometimes resorting to rowing their ships with small boats in desperate attempts to reach the edge of the calm region and find wind again. Some ships never escaped, their crews dying of thirst and starvation, the vessels eventually foundering or being discovered years later as derelict hulks drifting aimlessly, their decks empty of life, their logs telling stories of slow decline and mounting desperation. These derelict ships added to the Sargasso Sea's spooky reputation, as sailors passing through the region might encounter a vessel floating with no one aboard, her sails hanging limp, her decks scattered with evidence of recent occupation but her crew vanished or dead. Such encounters felt almost supernatural, like stumbling upon ghost ships that existed in some liminal space between the living world and whatever lay beyond. The sargassum weed that floats in thick mats across much of this region added to its otherworldly atmosphere. These floating masses of brown seaweed, some extending for miles, could create the illusion that a ship was approaching land, raising false hopes in crews desperate for any change in their circumstances. The weed itself posed risks, as thick accumulations could foul propellers on powered vessels or tangle rudders, impeding a ship's ability to maneuver. Sailors told stories, probably exaggerated but based on some kernel of truth, of ships becoming so entangled in sargassum that they could no longer move, slowly being pulled under as more weed accumulated around them, trapping the vessel like a fly in amber until she foundered and sank. While modern research suggests the scenario is unlikely, as sargassum mats are not dense enough to actually pull a ship under, the image captured the fear and strangeness that this region evoked in the minds of mariners who had to traverse it, never knowing if they would find wind again or become another vessel trapped in the endless calm. The water in the Sargasso Sea is remarkably clear and deep blue, the result of the minimal currents and low nutrient content that give the region a biological desert quality. The clarity allows sunlight to penetrate deeply, and sailors reported being able to see far down into the water, sometimes glimpsing shapes in the depths that added to their unease. In an era before understanding of ocean biology and submarine geology, these glimpses of the deep could take on sinister dimensions in the minds of tired, frightened men who had been becalmed for weeks with dwindling supplies. The depth of the water in this region, often exceeding several thousand meters, meant that a ship sinking here would fall into an abyss that would likely never be plumbed, making recovery of wreckage or bodies essentially impossible. Even today, with sonar and submersibles, the expense and difficulty of searching the deep Sargasso would be prohibitive except for the most important wrecks, meaning that ships lost here in centuries past remain lost, their bones resting on the seafloor in perpetual darkness, slowly being covered by sediment and forgotten. The psychological effects of being becalmed in the Sargasso cannot be overstated. Imagine being aboard a sailing ship that has been motionless for 2 weeks, the sun beating down day after day from a cloudless sky, the air hot and humid and utterly still, the ocean surface like a mirror broken only by the floating weed and occasionally by some creature rising from the depths to feed on the small fish and organisms that live in the sargassum. The ship is silent except for the creaking of timbers and the occasional scuff of a boot on deck. Water rations have been reduced. Food is running low. The crew grows irritable, then frightened, then desperate. Every horizon looks the same, offering no landmark or sign of progress. Days blend together in monotonous sameness. Some men begin to crack under the psychological strain, seeing things that are not there, hearing voices in the silence, succumbing to the kind of madness that confinement and fear can produce. Officers struggle to maintain discipline and morale as hope fades. And always there is the knowledge that other ships have entered this same region and were never heard from again, that the bones of lost sailors lie somewhere in the depths below, and that your ship might be joining them if wind does not come soon. While the Sargasso Sea's dangers were primarily a concern during the Age of Sail, the region has not entirely lost its ability to confound and endanger shipping even in the modern era. Powered vessels are not dependent on wind, but they can still experience mechanical failures that leave them adrift, and in a region as remote as the Sargasso, rescue can be difficult to arrange. The area sees relatively little ship traffic compared to major shipping lanes, meaning that a disabled vessel might not be spotted by other ships for days or weeks. Radio communication has made distress calls possible, greatly improving the chances of rescue, but a ship that loses power before she can send a call, perhaps due to a sudden catastrophic failure or fire, could still drift in the Sargasso indefinitely, her crew facing the same fundamental challenges that haunted sailors centuries ago: isolation, dwindling supplies, and the vast indifference of the ocean. Modern pleasure sailors sometimes transit the Sargasso when crossing the Atlantic, and even with GPS navigation and weather forecasting, the region demands respect and careful planning, as help is far away and conditions can change in unexpected ways. The Sargasso Sea reminds us that danger at sea does not always come from violent storms or towering waves. Sometimes the threat is stillness itself, the absence of the wind and current that ships need to make progress, the isolation that comes from being surrounded by thousands of miles of empty ocean with no way to move forward. In our modern world of engines and electronics, we sometimes forget how vulnerable sailing ships were to the whims of nature, how completely dependent their crews were on forces beyond human control. The ghost ships that drifted in the Sargasso, their crews lost to thirst or despair or whatever final fate claimed them, represent a particular kind of maritime tragedy. Not a sudden violent end, but a slow decline, a gradual realization that escape might not be possible, that the ocean has you in its grip and may not let go. These stories carry a quiet horror that is different from but no less powerful than the tales of ships destroyed in storms, and they remind us that the sea can kill in many ways, some quick and some terribly slow. The North Atlantic and its winter fury. As we continue our journey through history's most dangerous waters, we must spend time in the North Atlantic during winter, a region and season that have claimed more ships than perhaps any other combination of place and time in maritime history. The North Atlantic in winter is a realm of towering waves, freezing temperatures, dense fog, and storms that develop with shocking speed and violence, creating conditions that test the limits of even the most robust vessels and experienced crews. This is the ocean at its most hostile, a gray expanse where the sky and water merge into a uniform threat, where wind screams through rigging and across decks, where waves as tall as buildings march in endless procession, each one capable of crushing a ship or rolling her over if she meets it at the wrong angle. Many ships have vanished in the North Atlantic winter without leaving any record of their final moments, swallowed by storms so violent that they left no survivors to tell what happened. No wreckage that could be recovered from the heaving seas, only an absence in port when a vessel failed to arrive on schedule and the slow acceptance that she would not be coming home. The North Atlantic has always been one of the world's most important maritime highways, connecting Europe with North America, carrying trade goods and passengers, immigrants seeking new lives and sailors seeking wages. This heavy traffic continues year-round because commerce does not stop for winter, and ships must transit these waters even in the most dangerous season because delays cost money and cargoes must reach their destinations. In the age before reliable weather forecasting, ships venturing into the North Atlantic in winter were gambling their lives against the ocean's mood, hoping to cross before encountering a major storm but having no way to know what weather lay ahead. Captains made decisions based on experience and intuition, weighing the need to reach port against the risks of continuing in deteriorating conditions, sometimes guessing right and sometimes tragically wrong. Even with modern weather satellites and forecasting, the North Atlantic in winter remains dangerous, as storms can intensify faster than predicted and winds can shift unexpectedly, catching ships in vulnerable positions from which they cannot escape. One of the most famous North Atlantic mysteries involves the SS Warada, a passenger liner that disappeared in July 1909 while traveling from Durban, South Africa to Cape Town. Though her vanishing occurred in the South Atlantic rather than the North, the circumstances echo the winter North Atlantic disappearances. The Warada was a large modern ship, over 400 feet long, carrying over 200 passengers and crew. She departed Durban on July 26th and was spotted the next day by another vessel, the Clan McIntyre, whose officers later reported that the Warada appeared to be riding strangely in the water, though they noted nothing alarming enough to indicate immediate danger. After that sighting, the Warada was never seen again. When she failed to arrive in Cape Town, an extensive search was launched, covering thousands of square miles of ocean, but no trace of the ship or anyone aboard her was ever found. The Warada's disappearance shocked the maritime world because she was a modern vessel operated by a reputable company with an experienced crew, and she vanished in weather that, while rough, was not exceptionally severe. To this day, despite numerous searches and investigations, The wreck of the Warada has never been located, and what happened to her remains one of maritime history's great unsolved mysteries. Theories about the Warada's fate have focused on the possibility of instability in her design, as some passengers on her earlier voyages had commented that the ship seemed to roll heavily in moderate seas, suggesting she might have been top-heavy or poorly balanced. If the ship encountered a particularly large wave or series of waves, she might have rolled too far and capsized, sinking quickly and taking everyone aboard with her. This would explain the lack of survivors and wreckage, as a ship capsizing and sinking rapidly in rough seas would give the crew no time to launch lifeboats or send distress signals, and most of the wreckage would go down with the hull, leaving little to float to the surface. The waters where the Warada is believed to have sunk are deep and subject to strong currents, which would have quickly scattered any debris, making recovery unlikely. The families of those aboard were left with no answers and no closure, a fate that has befallen countless others throughout maritime history when ships disappear completely, leaving only grief and questions that can never be resolved. The winter North Atlantic has been particularly deadly for smaller vessels and fishing boats, which are more vulnerable to heavy weather than large merchant ships or liners. Fishing fleets have suffered terrible losses over the centuries, with boats and crews vanishing during winter storms, sometimes entire fleets lost in a single event when weather caught them far from port with no warning. The Andrea Gale, a fishing vessel from Gloucester, Massachusetts, was lost in October 1991 during what became known as the perfect storm, an unusual weather event where several systems converged to create exceptionally violent conditions in the North Atlantic. The Andrea Gale was working the fishing grounds east of Newfoundland when the storm developed, and despite the crew's experience and the vessel's seaworthiness, she was overwhelmed by waves estimated to have reached heights of over 30 meters. The ship vanished with all hands, and only a few pieces of debris were ever recovered, not enough to determine exactly what happened in her final moments. The loss of the Andrea Gale and her crew of 6 men became famous through the book and film that told their story, but their fate was not unique. Fishing boats are lost at sea with tragic regularity, particularly those that work in northern waters during the dangerous season. And while some of these losses leave evidence that allows investigators to piece together what happened, others result in complete disappearances where the boat and crew are simply never heard from again. The combination of factors that makes the winter North Atlantic so deadly includes not just the size and power of the waves, though these are formidable, but also the temperature. Water in the North Atlantic during winter hovers just above freezing, and a person falling overboard or forced to abandon ship into this water will survive only minutes before succumbing to hypothermia. This means that even if a crew manages to abandon a sinking ship and deploy life rafts, their chances of survival are minimal unless rescue arrives almost immediately, which is unlikely in the middle of a severe storm when visibility is near zero and other ships are struggling with their own survival. The cold also causes ice to form on ships, accumulating on decks and superstructures, adding weight high above the waterline and creating instability that can cause a vessel to capsize. Ice accumulation is a serious hazard for fishing vessels and smaller ships that cannot generate enough heat to prevent ice formation, and captains must sometimes make the difficult decision to turn back or heave to and try to chip away the ice, all while continuing to be battered by wind and waves. Numerous ships have capsized due to ice accumulation, rolling over suddenly when the weight above decks becomes too great, giving the crew no chance to escape. Fog is another danger in the North Atlantic, particularly in regions where the cold Labrador current meets warmer waters, creating dense fog banks that can reduce visibility to zero. Before radar became standard equipment on ships, fog was especially dangerous because vessels had no way to detect each other until they were very close, creating a constant risk of collision. 2 ships colliding in fog could both be severely damaged, and if the collision occurred in rough seas far from help, both might sink, doubling the tragedy and leaving investigators with a confusing scene where wreckage from 2 vessels is mixed together. Even with modern radar and radio communication, fog remains hazardous because it disorients crews, makes navigation more difficult, and can hide dangers like icebergs or rocky coasts until it is too late to avoid them. The combination of fog, cold, storms, and heavy seas makes the winter North Atlantic an environment where mistakes are punished quickly and harshly, where even experienced crews can find themselves overwhelmed, and where ships can vanish so completely that search and rescue teams find nothing despite days of looking. The straits and passages. Certain geographic features create particular hazards for ships, And among the most dangerous are the narrow straits and passages where ocean waters are forced through constricted areas, creating powerful currents, treacherous tides, and confused seas that can overwhelm even capable vessels. Throughout maritime history, certain straits have earned reputations as ship killers, places where currents run so fast that a vessel losing power can be swept onto rocks, where tides create whirlpools and standing waves, where winds funnel through with exceptional violence. Ships that vanish in these areas often do so within sight of land, which adds a particular poignancy to the losses, as witnesses on shore sometimes observe vessels getting into difficulty but can do nothing to help, watching helplessly as a ship is swept toward destruction. The Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, the Strait of Magellan at the tip of South America, the waters around Cape Horn, the channels of the Indonesian archipelago, and numerous other constricted waterways have all claimed their share of vessels, many of which disappeared without leaving survivors or sufficient wreckage to fully explain what happened. The Drake Passage, named for the English explorer Sir Francis Drake though he never actually sailed through it, is perhaps the most notorious stretch of ocean in the world, a 600-mile-wide channel where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans meet in a chaotic collision of currents and weather systems. This passage sees some of the largest waves and strongest winds on Earth, as weather systems sweep around Antarctica unimpeded by land masses, gathering strength and violence before encountering ships attempting to transit between South America and the Antarctic continent or between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans before the Panama Canal provided an alternative route. The combination of strong currents, extreme wind, and massive waves makes the Drake Passage exceptionally dangerous, and during the Age of Sail, many ships attempting to round Cape Horn or transit the Drake Passage were lost, often vanishing without a trace as storms overwhelmed them and the cold Antarctic waters claimed their crews within minutes. Even powerful modern ships treat the Drake Passage with respect, and yacht sailors who must cross it as part of circumnavigations or voyages to Antarctica do so with careful preparation and considerable trepidation, knowing that they are entering one of the ocean's most unforgiving environments. The currents in confined passages can be remarkably powerful, sometimes running at speeds that exceed a ship's ability to make headway against them. A vessel losing engine power in such a current becomes helpless, swept along until she either runs aground or is carried into clearer water where control can be regained. If the current sweeps a ship toward a rocky coast or reef, the crew may have only minutes to drop anchor or deploy emergency propulsion before impact. Ships pushed onto rocks by currents are typically torn apart quickly, the hull breached by sharp stone, waves pounding the vessel against the unyielding surface until she breaks up completely. In many cases, the crew has no chance to launch lifeboats or escape, particularly if the rocks are surrounded by surf that would swamp any small boat attempting to get through. The wreckage from such a disaster may be scattered over a wide area by tides and currents, with most of the hull sinking in deep water and only fragments washing up on nearby shores, leaving investigators with an incomplete picture of what happened and families with little to bury or memorialize. Whirlpools and tidal races, areas where opposing tides or currents create violent turbulence and rotating water, have been feared by sailors throughout history, and while stories of ships being pulled down by whirlpools are largely exaggerated, the turbulent conditions in tidal races can certainly endanger vessels, particularly smaller boats that can be capsized by sudden waves or caught in currents that spin them around and push them toward danger. The Saltstraumen near Bodo, Norway, creates one of the world's strongest tidal currents, with water speeds reaching 25 kilometers per hour as huge volumes of water are forced through a narrow strait. The Korvrekken whirlpool between Scottish islands, the Mossstraumen off Norway that inspired legends of the Maelstrom, and numerous other locations around the world create hazardous conditions that have caught unwary ships and smaller vessels over the centuries, some of which were never seen again after entering these turbulent waters. Channels through archipelagos create their own special hazards, as coral reefs and shallow banks surround the deeper passages, and navigating through such areas requires precise knowledge of the route, careful attention to navigation, and often the assistance of local pilots who know the safe channels. Before modern navigation technology, ships transiting these areas relied on charts that were often incomplete or inaccurate, on visual landmarks that could be obscured by weather, and on lead lines to measure depth, all methods that required skill and luck to succeed. A ship that strayed even slightly from the proper channel could run aground on a reef or bank that appeared suddenly with no warning, and once aground in such an area, particularly if waves were breaking, the vessel could be destroyed in hours or even minutes. The Indonesian archipelago, with its thousands of islands and complex channels, has been the site of numerous shipwrecks over centuries of maritime trade. And while many of these wrecks are known and their locations recorded, others vanished completely, presumably having struck reefs or banks in remote areas where no witnesses observed their fate and no wreckage was ever found. The Straits of the Mediterranean, while not as violent as the Drake Passage or as treacherous as some tropical archipelago channels, have their own history of ship disappearances, particularly the Strait of Messina between Sicily and mainland Italy. This narrow strait has strong tidal currents and, historically, has been associated with the mythical monsters Scylla and Charybdis, sea creatures said to lurk on either side of the passage, threatening ships that attempted to pass through. While these monsters were mythical, they represented the real dangers of the strait, where currents could push ships toward rocky coasts on either side, and where navigating the narrow passage required skill and favorable conditions. In the age of or powered galleys and early sailing ships, many vessels were lost in the Strait of Messina, some overwhelmed by currents, others dashed against rocks. And while these losses were generally witnessed and their causes understood, the pattern of ship losses gave rise to the myths that made the strait notorious throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. The Great Lakes and their inland seas. While we have focused primarily on oceanic disappearances, it is important to recognize that treacherous waters exist not only in the open sea but also in large freshwater bodies, particularly the Great Lakes of North America. These 5 enormous lakes, containing about 20% of the world's surface fresh water, have been the site of thousands of shipwrecks over the past several centuries. And while they may seem less threatening than the ocean because they are freshwater and surrounded by land, they have proven to be exceptionally dangerous, particularly during autumn and winter when storms sweep across their expanses with devastating power. The Great Lakes have claimed numerous ships in ways that echo ocean disappearances, with vessels vanishing in storms without sending distress calls or leaving substantial wreckage, their crews lost and their final moments a mystery that has haunted the region's maritime history. The most famous Great Lakes disappearance is undoubtedly that of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a massive war carrier that sank in Lake Superior on November 10, 1975, taking all 29 crew members with her. The Edmund Fitzgerald was not a small vessel vulnerable to storms. She was over 700 feet long, one of the largest ships operating on the Great Lakes, and had been in service for 17 years, making countless trips carrying iron ore from mines in Minnesota to steel mills in other Great Lakes ports. On her final voyage, the Fitzgerald loaded over 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, a form of iron ore, and departed Superior, Wisconsin, bound for Detroit. The weather forecast called for a storm, but nothing beyond what the ship and crew had encountered many times before. As the Fitzgerald crossed Lake Superior, conditions deteriorated rapidly, with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and waves reported to reach heights of over 35 feet. The ship radioed to the Arthur M. Anderson, another freighter nearby, reporting damage and difficulties, and her final message indicated she was holding her own despite the severe conditions. Moments later, the Edmund Fitzgerald vanished from the Anderson's radar screen. She had sunk in less than a minute, so quickly that her crew had no time to send a distress call or abandon ship. All 29 men aboard died instantly when the ship went down, and despite the relatively shallow depth of Lake Superior where she sank, only about 530 feet, and despite extensive investigation and several dives to examine the wreck, exactly why the Edmund Fitzgerald sank remains uncertain. The loss of the Fitzgerald shocked the Great Lakes maritime community and the wider public because of how suddenly and completely the ship went down. Here was a modern vessel with experienced crew, equipped with the technology of the 1970s, including radio communication and weather information, operating in a freshwater lake surrounded by land, yet she sank as completely and mysteriously as ships lost in the middle of the ocean. Investigations have proposed several theories. That the ship struck an underwater shoal that damaged her hull and allowed water to flood in, that waves broke over her deck and flooded through damaged hatch covers, that structural failure occurred allowing the ship to break apart, or that a combination of factors overwhelmed her ability to stay afloat. The wreck lies broken in 2 sections on the lake bottom, her bow and stern separated, which suggests she broke apart either during the sinking or on impact with the bottom. Divers who have visited the site report that the wreck is remarkably intact given the violence of her sinking, with many features still recognizable, but the ship holds her secrets, and the exact sequence of events that led to her loss may never be known with certainty. The Great Lakes are subject to weather phenomena that can create exceptionally dangerous conditions despite the lakes being freshwater and surrounded by land. Storm systems moving across the continent can intensify rapidly as they cross the lakes, drawing energy from the relatively warm water, particularly in autumn when the water remains warmer than the increasingly cold air masses moving down from the Arctic. These storms can generate winds of hurricane force and waves that, while shorter in length than ocean waves, are steep and closely spaced, creating confused seas that batter ships from multiple directions. The shallower average depth of the lakes compared to the open ocean means that waves reach their maximum height quickly and can break with exceptional violence. And a ship caught in such conditions can be overwhelmed before the crew fully realizes how serious the situation has become. Fog is also a hazard on the Great Lakes, forming suddenly and densely when warm air moves over cold water or vice versa, reducing visibility to zero and creating collision risks that have resulted in numerous disasters over the years. Another vanishing on the Great Lakes that remains mysterious is the loss of the SS Bannockburn, a freighter that disappeared on Lake Superior in November 1902. The Bannockburn departed Port Arthur, Ontario, loaded with grain and bound for a port on the lower lakes. She was seen by another vessel on November 21st, and after that, she was never seen again. No distress call was heard. No wreckage was found despite searches. The ship and her crew of 20 simply vanished into Lake Superior as if they had never existed. Over the following decades, there were sporadic reports of the Bannockburn being seen, always from a distance, always seeming to vanish before other ships could approach, leading to legends that she had become a ghost ship, doomed to sail Lake Superior forever. These sightings were almost certainly cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking, but they added to the mystery and made the Bannockburn one of the most famous lost ships on the lakes. To this day, despite advances in underwater search technology, the wreck of the Bannockburn has never been located, and what happened to her remains unknown. She may have encountered a storm that sank her so quickly that the crew had no chance to signal for help, or she may have developed structural failure that allowed her to flood and sink rapidly, or some other disaster overtook her. Whatever happened, it occurred without witnesses and without leaving traces that could be found, adding one more mystery to the long list of Great Lakes vanishings. The lakes have served as major transportation routes for over 300 years, carrying furs and trade goods in the early colonial period, then later grain and ore and coal and other bulk cargoes as the region industrialized. This heavy traffic has meant that thousands of ships have worked these waters, and hundreds have been lost to storms, collisions, fires, and other disasters. Most of these wrecks are known and their locations charted, as the lakes are extensively mapped and wreck diving is a popular activity in the region. However, some ships remain lost, their resting places unknown despite searches, reminding us that even in these relatively confined waters, the lakes can still hide their secrets. The cold fresh water of the Great Lakes preserves wrecks remarkably well compared to the ocean, as the lack of salt slows corrosion and there are no shipworms or other marine organisms that consume wood. Divers who explore Great Lakes wrecks often find them in startlingly good condition, almost frozen in time, and there is something deeply moving about seeing a ship that sank a century ago still largely intact. Her hull still in place, her cargo still in her holds, her structure still recognizable as the vessel she once was. These wrecks are graves, and divers treat them with appropriate respect, but they also serve as time capsules, preserving moments of history and allowing us to connect with the past in tangible ways. The communities around the Great Lakes have a deep maritime heritage, with generations of families involved in shipping, shipbuilding, and related industries. The loss of ships like the Edmund Fitzgerald is not just an abstract historical tragedy for these communities, but a personal one, as many people knew crew members or had family members who worked on the lakes and understood the risks firsthand. The songs and stories that commemorate lost ships and sailors are part of the regional culture, ways of remembering and honoring those who were claimed by the lakes. Gordon Lightfoot's song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, became an anthem of sorts, telling the story of the ship's loss in a way that captured the sadness and mystery, and even people far from the Great Lakes region found themselves moved by the tale of a ship that vanished on an inland sea, taking 29 men with her into the cold, dark water. These cultural responses to maritime tragedy serve an important function, allowing communities to grieve collectively and ensuring that those who were lost are not forgotten, that their names and their stories remain part of the shared memory even as the years pass and direct connections fade. Theories and explanations. As we have journeyed through these various regions and examined specific disappearances, we have touched on many theories that attempt to explain why ships vanish without a trace. It is worth spending time now to look more systematically at the most commonly proposed explanations and to consider how they might account for at least some of the ghost fleet mysteries that have haunted maritime history. Understanding these theories does not diminish the mystery or tragedy of the disappearances. Rather, it helps us appreciate the complex interplay of natural forces that make the ocean such a dangerous environment and recognize that even when we can propose plausible explanations, the lack of evidence means we can rarely be certain of exactly what happened to any specific ship. The ocean is vast and deep and does not give up its secrets easily, and many mysteries will remain unsolved not because no reasonable explanation exists, but because confirming what happened would require finding and examining wreckage that lies in inaccessible depths or has been scattered across hundreds of miles of seafloor. One of the most straightforward explanations for ship disappearances is rapid catastrophic structural failure. Ships are complex structures subject to tremendous stresses from waves, cargo weight, corrosion, and metal fatigue. If a hull develops cracks due to metal fatigue, or if welds fail, or if collision damage from an earlier incident has weakened the structure without being properly repaired, the ship can break apart suddenly, particularly when stressed by heavy seas. When such a failure occurs, the vessel can sink in minutes or even seconds, going down so fast that the crew has no time to send distress signals or deploy lifeboats. The ship takes most of her contents and crew with her, leaving only scattered light debris floating on the surface, and this debris can quickly be dispersed by wind and currents, making it unlikely to be recovered. This explanation likely accounts for at least some disappearances, particularly older vessels that were not subject to the rigorous inspection regimes that modern maritime regulations require. Ships that were poorly maintained, overloaded, or structurally compromised by age or damage would be especially vulnerable to sudden failure, and in heavy weather, the additional stress could be enough to trigger catastrophic collapse. Rogue waves offer another possible explanation for some vanishings. For many years, rogue waves were considered largely mythical, stories told by sailors that scientists dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstandings. However, satellite observations and research over the past few decades have confirmed that rogue waves are real phenomena, individual waves that are much larger than the surrounding sea state, appearing seemingly out of nowhere and capable of striking a ship with overwhelming force. These waves can reach heights of 30 meters or more, towering walls of water that can break over a ship's deck, smash superstructures, break windows on the bridge, and flood the vessel. If such a wave strikes a ship broadside, it can roll the vessel over, and if the ship is particularly top-heavy or unlucky in the exact moment of impact, she may capsize completely and sink. Rogue waves appear to be formed by the constructive interference of multiple wave trains, where waves moving in slightly different directions at slightly different speeds momentarily align to create a single much larger wave. This process is unpredictable and temporary, which means that by the time anyone could respond to reports of a rogue wave, the wave has already dissipated back into the normal sea state. A ship struck by a rogue wave might sink so quickly that nearby vessels see nothing, and if the impact occurs at night or in poor visibility, the disaster could unfold without any witnesses at all. Human error and navigational mistakes account for many maritime disasters and likely play a role in some disappearances. A ship that is off course due to navigational error might run aground on a reef or shoal that was not expected to be in that location, or might enter dangerous waters that the crew believed they were avoiding. Before GPS and satellite navigation, determining a ship's position at sea required celestial navigation using sextants to measure the angles of stars or the sun, a technique that works well in clear weather with visible horizons but becomes difficult or impossible in overcast conditions or when fog obscures the horizon. Ships could sail for days without being able to confirm their exact position, relying instead on dead reckoning, calculating their position based on speed and course from their last known location. This method accumulates errors, and a ship could be many miles from where her navigator believed she was, potentially putting her in danger without the crew realizing until too late. Magnetic anomalies could worsen these errors by causing compass readings to be incorrect, leading the navigator to make calculations based on faulty heading information. A ship that ran aground due to such errors might break up quickly in heavy surf, sinking in pieces that scattered across the seabed, leaving no consolidated wreck to find and little debris to float to the surface. Extreme weather remains one of the most obvious and frequently cited explanations for ship disappearances. Storms at sea can develop intensities that exceed forecasts, and conditions can deteriorate faster than ships can reach shelter. A vessel caught in the open ocean during a major storm faces waves that can be as tall as 6-story buildings, winds that can exceed 100 miles per hour, rain and spray that reduce visibility to nearly zero, and seas that come from multiple directions as weather systems interact. In such conditions, even a well-built ship with an experienced crew can be overwhelmed. Waves can break over the deck and flood through hatches, adding weight that reduces the ship's stability and buoyancy. Wind can push the vessel onto her beam ends, rolling her to dangerous angles. Cargo can shift if it was not properly secured, further compromising stability. Electrical systems can fail due to water intrusion, leaving the ship without power and unable to maintain steerage or pump out flooding water. Once a ship loses control in severe weather, her fate often depends on luck, whether the next wave hits in a way that allows her to recover or pushes her past the point of no return. Ships that capsize or founder in storms may sink within minutes, and in the chaos of wind and waves, even nearby vessels might not realize what has happened until the storm passes and the missing ship fails to report her position. Fires and explosions, while less common than structural failure or weather-related disasters, can sink ships with shocking speed, particularly if the fire starts in an area containing cargo or fuel. A fire that reaches a fuel tank can cause an explosion that blows out the hull, allowing the sea to rush in and sink the ship in minutes. Even without explosions, fires can generate heat that weakens steel structures, causing collapse that floods the ship. Modern fire suppression systems and crew training have reduced the risk of fire disasters. But in earlier eras, ships had limited means to fight fires, especially deep in cargo holds or in areas difficult to access. A fire that got out of control could consume a ship before she could reach port, and if the fire spread to critical areas or caused enough damage to compromise watertight integrity, the ship would sink. In cases where fire occurred far from shipping lanes, particularly at night or in poor weather when smoke would not be visible from a distance, a ship could burn and sink without anyone witnessing the disaster, leaving only scattered debris that might never be recovered. Piracy and warfare offer explanations for some disappearances, particularly during periods of conflict when submarines and armed raiders operated in certain waters. A ship torpedoed or shelled by a submarine might sink quickly, and if the attack occurred without warning and resulted in rapid sinking, there might be no survivors to report what happened. During World War I and World War II, many merchant ships were sunk by submarines, and while most of these attacks were eventually documented through naval records, some ships vanished without their fate ever being confirmed. In the chaos of war, with ships traveling under radio silence and submarines operating covertly, it was sometimes impossible to determine what had happened to a missing vessel. She might have been torpedoed or struck a mine, or sunk by a surface raider, or been lost to natural causes, and without evidence or witnesses, her disappearance remained unexplained. Even outside of wartime, piracy has been a factor in some ship disappearances, particularly in regions where pirate groups have operated. Pirates seeking to steal a ship's cargo might overwhelm the crew, take what they want, and then scuttle the ship to eliminate evidence, sending her and any murdered crew members to the bottom. Methane eruptions from the seabed, while unproven as a cause of ship disappearances, remain an intriguing theory that continues to be debated. Methane hydrates, frozen deposits of natural gas, exist on the seabed in various regions, particularly along continental margins and in areas of deep water. If these hydrates are destabilized, perhaps by changes in temperature or pressure, or by underwater landslides or seismic activity, large amounts of methane gas could be released rapidly, creating a plume of bubbles rising through the water column. This bubble plume would reduce the density of the water, and a ship floating above such an area at the moment of eruption could suddenly lose buoyancy and sink rapidly, as if the ocean had opened beneath her. This theory is attractive because it would explain the sudden disappearance of ships without any apparent warning, as the crew would have no indication that anything was wrong until the moment the water density changed and the ship began to drop. However, evidence for methane eruptions causing ship sinkings remains largely theoretical. Methane plumes have been detected and studied, and there is evidence that large releases have occurred in the geological past. But linking specific ship disappearances to methane eruptions has proven difficult because the eruptions would be temporary and might leave no lasting evidence. Finally, we must acknowledge that some disappearances may have mundane explanations that simply cannot be confirmed due to lack of evidence. A ship might have sunk due to a combination of minor factors that individually would not be dangerous but together proved fatal. A small leak that was not repaired properly, combined with heavy weather that prevented the pumps from keeping up, combined with a cargo that shifted and reduced stability, might have been enough to sink the ship. No single factor would be dramatic or unusual enough to stand out, but the combination proved deadly. In the absence of survivors or substantial wreckage, investigators cannot piece together these contributing factors, and the disappearance remains mysterious not because anything unusual happened but simply because the evidence needed to explain it was lost when the ship went down. This possibility reminds us that mystery does not always require exotic explanations. Sometimes ships vanish for relatively ordinary reasons, and the mystery lies not in what happened but in our inability to prove it. The human cost and the families left behind. While we have explored theories and examined specific disappearances, it is important to remember that every lost ship represents human lives cut short and families left to grieve without closure. The ghost fleet mysteries we have discussed involved thousands of people over the centuries, each person with their own story, their own reasons for being at sea, their own dreams and plans that were never fulfilled. Some were career sailors who had spent decades on the ocean and knew its dangers intimately. Others were making their first voyage, young people seeking adventure or economic opportunity, not yet fully understanding the risks they faced. Some were passengers, travelers who had booked passage across the ocean for business or immigration or family reasons, trusting that the ship and crew would deliver them safely to their destination. When a ship vanishes, all these individual stories are cut off simultaneously, creating a collective tragedy that reverberates through communities and families for generations. The families left behind when a ship disappears face a particularly difficult form of grief. When someone dies in an accident or from illness, there is a body to mourn, a funeral to hold, a grave to visit. These rituals help people process loss and begin to heal. But when a ship vanishes without a trace, families are left with uncertainty. In the days and weeks immediately after a ship is reported missing, there is hope, often desperate and irrational hope, that the ship will be found, that survivors will be rescued, that somehow their loved one will return. As days turn to weeks and search efforts are called off, this hope begins to fade but may never completely disappear. Some families have waited for years, even decades, holding on to the possibility that perhaps their loved one somehow survived, perhaps reached an island or was rescued by a passing ship and will someday return. This kind of ambiguous loss, where death is presumed but not confirmed, can be psychologically devastating, making it difficult for family members to move forward with their own lives because they cannot fully accept that their loved one is gone. Port communities where ships were based often suffered collective grief when a vessel and crew were lost. In smaller ports, many families might be connected to the lost ship, either having crew members aboard or being related to or friends with those who were. The loss of a single ship could devastate a community's economy and social structure, particularly in times when fishing or merchant sailing were primary occupations. Memorial services would be held, often in churches or at waterfront locations, where the community could gather to remember those who were lost and to support each other in their grief. These memorials served important functions, allowing people to express their sorrow collectively, to hear the names of the lost spoken aloud and remembered, and to connect with others who understood the particular pain of losing someone to the sea. Many coastal communities have monuments to lost sailors, stone memorials inscribed with names and dates, standing as permanent reminders of the price that has been paid over the centuries by those who made their living from the ocean. The lack of bodies to bury has always been particularly difficult for families. Throughout many cultures and religions, proper burial or funeral rites are considered essential for the deceased's journey into the afterlife and for the psychological well-being of the survivors. When a loved one's body is lost at sea, families must find alternative ways to memorialize and grieve. Some hold funerals with empty coffins or memorial services without remains. Others create private rituals, perhaps visiting the shore to throw flowers into the water or speaking to the ocean as a way of maintaining connection with the person they lost. These adaptations show the resilience of human beings in the face of loss, our ability to create meaning and ritual even when traditional structures are not possible. Yet the absence of remains often leaves a wound that never fully heals, a sense that something essential is missing from the grieving process, that there was no proper goodbye or final moment to mark the transition. Financial hardship often compounded the emotional devastation for families of lost sailors. In earlier centuries, before social safety nets and maritime insurance became common, the loss of a family's primary wage earner could mean immediate poverty. Wives and children of lost sailors might have no source of income and no savings to fall back on, forcing them to depend on charity or on extended family members who might themselves be struggling. Some port communities developed mutual aid societies where sailors contributed to funds that would support the families of those lost at sea, early forms of insurance that recognized the shared risks all sailors faced and the need for community support when tragedy struck. These societies represented a practical recognition that the ocean's dangers affected not just individual sailors but entire communities, and that the burden of loss should be shared collectively rather than falling entirely on individual families already devastated by grief. In modern times, improved safety regulations, better weather forecasting, satellite communication, and international search and rescue coordination have reduced the frequency of ship disappearances, but they have not eliminated them entirely. Even today, ships are occasionally lost with all hands, and families face the same terrible uncertainty and grief that has always accompanied maritime disaster. The difference now is that most modern disappearances occur despite the presence of multiple safety systems, which can make the loss even more difficult to understand. When a ship equipped with modern navigation, communication, and safety equipment still vanishes, families may struggle to comprehend how this was possible, how their loved one could be lost in an age when we can track packages in real time and communicate instantly across thousands of miles. The rarity of modern disappearances, while reflecting improved safety, can make individual losses feel even more unfair and inexplicable, as if their loved one was claimed by a danger that should no longer exist. Support for families of lost sailors has improved over time as understanding of grief and trauma has advanced. Organizations exist now to help families cope with maritime losses, providing counseling, connecting families with others who have experienced similar losses, and advocating for improved safety regulations and search and rescue capabilities. These organizations recognize that the families of lost sailors need support that extends beyond the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, that grief for ambiguous losses can resurface unexpectedly years later, and that anniversaries and reminders can be particularly difficult. The work these organizations do is quiet and often unrecognized, but it is essential, helping families navigate their grief and find ways to honor their loved ones and move forward with their own lives while carrying the memory of those who were lost. Technological changes and modern safety. As we consider the long history of ship disappearances, it is worth examining how technology and maritime regulations have evolved in response to these tragedies, and how these changes have made modern shipping significantly safer than in previous centuries. Each major disaster has typically led to investigations and recommendations that improved safety standards, creating a gradual accumulation of knowledge and requirements that have saved countless lives. While ships still occasionally vanish, the frequency of such events has decreased dramatically compared to the age of sail or even the early 20th century, reflecting both technological advances and improved understanding of the ocean environment and the forces that endanger vessels. This progress represents a positive legacy of the tragedies we have discussed, a recognition that we can learn from loss and take steps to prevent similar disasters in the future. The development of radio communication revolutionized maritime safety by allowing ships in distress to call for help. Before radio, a ship facing disaster had no way to alert other vessels or shore stations unless she happened to be within sight of another ship at the moment of crisis. This meant that many ships sank with no one aware they were in trouble until they failed to arrive at their destination, at which point days or weeks might have passed and any survivors would have long since perished. The introduction of radio distress calls, standardized through the SOS signal and later the Mayday call, meant that ships in trouble could alert others who might be able to render assistance. The requirement that passenger ships maintain radio watch at all times further improved the chances that distress calls would be heard and acted upon. While radio communication did not prevent disasters, it improved the odds that survivors would be rescued and that the circumstances of a ship's loss would be understood, as distress messages often provided information about what was happening aboard the stricken vessel. Weather forecasting and satellite meteorology have given ships much better information about conditions they might encounter, allowing captains to route around dangerous storms or delay departures until weather improves. In earlier eras, ships set sail with only general knowledge of typical weather patterns for the season and location, with no ability to know what specific conditions lay ahead. A ship might sail directly into a developing storm system without any warning, suddenly finding herself in conditions beyond what she could handle. Modern weather satellites provide continuous monitoring of storm systems, tracking their development and movement, allowing meteorologists to predict with reasonable accuracy where storms will be and how intense they will become. This information is transmitted to ships at sea, giving captains time to alter course or seek shelter. While weather forecasting is not perfect and storms can still intensify faster than predicted, the improvement in information has undoubtedly prevented many disasters by allowing ships to avoid the worst conditions. Navigation technology has advanced dramatically with the development of GPS satellite systems that provide precise position information anywhere on Earth. Before GPS, navigation relied on celestial observations when skies were clear, radio beacons when close enough to shore, and dead reckoning when neither was available. These methods worked well in skilled hands but were subject to errors that could accumulate over time, potentially putting a ship dangerously off course without the crew realizing it. GPS provides continuous, accurate position information that removes this uncertainty, making it much less likely that a ship will run aground on an unexpected reef or shoal or become lost and unable to report her position. The integration of GPS with electronic chart systems that display the ship's position on detailed maps further improves safety by making it immediately apparent if the vessel is approaching shallow water or other hazards. Radar and sonar technologies allow ships to detect other vessels, land, icebergs, and underwater obstacles, providing awareness that was impossible in earlier eras. Before radar, ships relied on visual lookouts and sound signals like foghorns to detect dangers and avoid collisions, methods that worked only when visibility and hearing conditions permitted. A ship could be approaching another vessel or a coastline in fog and have no indication until collision was imminent. Radar allowed ships to see through fog and darkness, detecting other vessels and land masses at distances of many miles, providing time to alter course and avoid danger. Sonar, while primarily used for depth finding, can also detect large underwater objects and schools of fish, giving ships warning of shallow water or obstacles that might endanger them. These technologies have dramatically reduced collision and grounding incidents, though they cannot eliminate such risks entirely, as equipment can fail and human operators can make mistakes interpreting the information. Ship design and construction have improved as engineers have learned from past failures and as regulations have mandated stronger standards. Modern ships are built with watertight compartments that can be sealed to isolate flooding, with redundant systems for power and steering, and with materials and construction methods that provide greater strength and resistance to corrosion than older vessels. Classification societies inspect ships regularly to ensure they meet safety standards, and ships that do not pass inspection can be denied permission to sail. These regulations have eliminated or reduced many of the factors that caused ships to sink in earlier eras, such as overloading, structural weakness, and inadequate maintenance. While no ship is unsinkable, as the fate of the Titanic famously demonstrated, modern vessels are far more robust and survivable than their predecessors. International cooperation in maritime safety has created systems for monitoring ship movements and coordinating rescue efforts. The International Maritime Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations, develops and maintains regulations covering all aspects of shipping safety, from construction standards to crew training to pollution prevention. The Global Maritime Distress and Safety System requires that ships carry equipment capable of automatically transmitting distress alerts to rescue coordination centers, ensuring that even if a ship sinks too quickly for the crew to manually send a distress call, an alert will still be transmitted. Ships are required to carry survival equipment including lifeboats, life rafts, immersion suits, and emergency beacons, giving crews better chances of surviving if they must abandon ship. These systems and requirements represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries of maritime experience, built on the foundation of tragedies that taught painful lessons about what can go wrong at sea and how better to prepare for and respond to emergencies. Despite all these improvements, ships still occasionally vanish, reminding us that the ocean remains a fundamentally dangerous environment where unexpected events can overwhelm even modern safety systems. The El Faro, a cargo ship that sank during Hurricane Joaquin in October 2015, demonstrated that modern vessels remain vulnerable to extreme weather. The El Faro was a large cargo ship equipped with all modern safety equipment, but she sailed into the path of a rapidly intensifying hurricane and was overwhelmed by the storm. The ship sank with all 33 crew members, and while her voyage data recorder was eventually recovered from the wreck, providing information about her final hours, the disaster showed that even with modern forecasting and technology, ships can still make decisions that put them in danger, and once in extreme conditions, even robust modern vessels can be lost. The ocean does not care about human technology or safety regulations. It operates according to physical laws and forces that remain beyond our control, and when conditions become extreme enough, our ships and our safety systems can still be overcome. Memorials and remembrance. Throughout the world, in port cities and coastal communities, memorials stand to honor those who have been lost at sea. These monuments serve as focal points for remembrance and grief, places where families can go to feel connected to loved ones who have no graves, where communities can gather on anniversaries of disasters to collectively remember and honor the lost. The memorials take many forms, from simple stone markers inscribed with names and dates to elaborate sculptures depicting sailors or ships, from plaques mounted on harbor walls to dedicated parks overlooking the sea. Whatever their form, these memorials serve essential functions in helping communities process and remember maritime tragedies, ensuring that those who were lost are not forgotten even as generations pass and direct memories fade. One of the most moving memorials stands in Gloucester, Massachusetts, a fishing community that has lost many boats and crews to the North Atlantic over the centuries. The Gloucester Fisherman's Memorial, a bronze statue of a fisherman at a ship's wheel, was dedicated in 1923 and bears the inscription, "They that go down to the sea in ships." The memorial honors all Gloucester fishermen lost at sea, with additional plaques added over the years listing the names of those who did not return. The site overlooks the harbor where fishing boats still depart today, connecting past and present, reminding current generations of fishermen of the risks they face and the many who came before them who paid the ultimate price. Families visit the memorial to remember their lost loved ones, sometimes leaving flowers or other tokens, standing quietly by the water to feel some connection to those who vanished beneath the waves. In coastal communities around the Great Lakes, memorials honor those lost in freshwater shipwrecks. Whitefish Point, Michigan, near where the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, has become a pilgrimage site for families of those lost in Great Lakes disasters. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum there maintains exhibits about lost vessels and crews, preserving their stories and ensuring that visitors understand the dangers that ships have faced on these inland seas. Every November 10th, the anniversary of the Fitzgerald sinking, a ceremony is held where the ship's bell, recovered from the wreck, is rung 29 times, once for each crew member lost. Families of the victims attend these ceremonies, finding solace in the fact that their loved ones are remembered and honored, that the community recognizes their sacrifice and keeps their memory alive. Maritime museums around the world serve similar memorial functions, collecting artifacts from lost ships, displaying photographs and personal effects of lost sailors, and telling the stories of maritime disasters. These museums help educate the public about the realities and dangers of life at sea, honoring maritime heritage while acknowledging its costs. Visitors to these museums often come away with deeper appreciation for sailors and the challenges they face, recognizing that the goods and services we take for granted often depend on people willing to risk their lives on the ocean. The museums preserve not just physical artifacts but also oral histories, recorded interviews with survivors of maritime disasters, and with families of those lost, capturing in their own words what these experiences meant and how they shaped lives and communities. Annual memorial services and observances help maritime communities collectively remember their losses. These events, often held on anniversaries of specific disasters or on designated days honoring all lost at sea, bring together families, survivors, current maritime workers, and community members. Religious leaders often participate, offering prayers and blessings, and officials may speak about the importance of maritime safety and the ongoing work to prevent future tragedies. The names of the lost are read aloud, a practice that can take significant time when commemorating disasters with many victims, but which serves the important purpose of ensuring that each person is individually remembered and honored. Music, often including maritime songs and hymns associated with sailors and the sea, adds emotional depth to these ceremonies, helping participants express feelings that might be difficult to put into words. Online memorials and databases have emerged in recent years as new forms of remembrance, allowing people around the world to access information about lost ships and sailors and to contribute their own memories and information. These digital archives can preserve far more detail than physical monuments, including photographs, documents, newspaper accounts, and family stories that might otherwise be lost. Descendants of lost sailors can search these databases to learn about ancestors they never knew, connecting with family history and with others researching the same disasters. While digital memorials lack the physical presence and emotional impact of standing by a monument overlooking the sea, they serve the valuable function of making information accessible and preserving details that might otherwise be forgotten as generations pass and physical materials deteriorate. The act of remembering serves important purposes beyond honoring the dead. It reminds us of the costs of maritime commerce and exploration, the reality that our global trade system and our historical development have been built partly on the sacrifices of those who went to sea and sometimes did not return. It connects us to our maritime heritage and to the communities and families who continue to send their members to sea, trusting that modern safety measures will bring them home but knowing that risks remain. It encourages continued attention to maritime safety, as remembering past disasters motivates efforts to prevent future ones. And perhaps most importantly, it provides some measure of comfort to families and communities, assuring them that their loved ones mattered, that their losses are recognized, and that even though the sea took them and left no grave to mark their passing, they have not been forgotten and their memory is honored by those who came after. Continuing mysteries and modern searches. Despite advances in underwater search technology, many of the ghost ships we have discussed remain lost, their wrecks never located even though we know approximately where they went down. The ocean is vast and deep, and finding a shipwreck even when the search area is relatively constrained can require years of effort and enormous expense. Some searches have successfully located famous wrecks, bringing closure to families and solving historical mysteries, while others have searched for years without success, reminding us that the ocean still guards many secrets. The continuing searches for lost ships represent both scientific challenges and emotional quests, driven by desire to understand what happened, to honor those who were lost, and to test the limits of our technology and determination. The search for the SS Warada has continued intermittently for over a century, with multiple expeditions examining the seafloor off South Africa's eastern coast where the ship is believed to have sunk. Various objects have been found over the years, each briefly raising hopes that the Warada has been located, but none have proven to be from the lost ship. The search is complicated by the depth of water, the strong currents in the area that could have carried wreckage far from the sinking site, and the possibility that the ship is buried under sediment that has accumulated over the decades since she sank. Despite these challenges, interest in finding the Warada remains strong, partly because the mystery of her disappearance has captured public imagination, and partly because solving the mystery might provide valuable information about ship safety and stability that could inform modern vessel design. Each new expedition brings hope that improved technology will finally locate the wreck and answer the questions that have lingered for over a century. Searches for the USS Cyclops have similarly continued sporadically, with various theories proposed about where the ship might have sunk and what might have caused her loss. The lack of any distress signal or wreckage from such a large vessel remains puzzling, and locating the wreck would likely provide answers about her fate. However, the Atlantic Ocean where she disappeared is thousands of feet deep in many areas, and searching such depths requires specialized equipment and significant funding. The Cyclops could lie anywhere within a search area covering thousands of square miles, and without more specific information about her location, finding her would be like searching for a needle in a vast blue haystack. Yet interest in solving the mystery remains, particularly within naval and military history communities, and advances in autonomous underwater vehicles and side-scan sonar technology have made deep ocean searches somewhat more feasible than in the past. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was located within days of her sinking, as the relatively shallow depth of Lake Superior made finding her much easier than searching the open ocean. The wreck has been visited by divers and examined by submersibles, and a significant amount is known about her condition and position on the lake bottom. Yet even with this access, debate continues about exactly what caused her to sink, demonstrating that even when a wreck can be examined, mysteries may remain. The Fitzgerald rests in water cold and dark enough that visibility is limited and time on the wreck is constrained, making thorough examination difficult. The ship is also considered a grave site, and there are ethical considerations about how much disturbance of the wreck is appropriate. Families of the lost crew have expressed different views about whether the wreck should be further examined or left undisturbed, and these concerns must be balanced against scientific interest in understanding what happened. Some searches for lost ships have been motivated primarily by historical interest and the desire to preserve maritime heritage. When a wreck is located, it becomes an underwater archaeological site that can provide information about shipbuilding techniques, cargo and trade patterns, and daily life aboard ships of different eras. Organizations dedicated to maritime archaeology work to document wrecks, often partnering with governments to ensure that wreck sites are protected from looters and treated with appropriate respect. These organizations recognize that shipwrecks are finite resources, as they deteriorate over time and are subject to damage from natural processes and human interference. Documenting wrecks while they still retain their integrity preserves information for future generations and ensures that even if the physical remains eventually disappear, their stories and the knowledge they contain are not lost. Technology for underwater search and exploration continues to advance, offering hope that more lost ships will eventually be found. Autonomous underwater vehicles can now survey large areas of seafloor, using side-scan sonar and other sensors to detect objects that might be wreckage. These vehicles can operate at depths that would be dangerous or impossible for human divers, can remain underwater for extended periods, and can cover search areas much more quickly than was possible with earlier technology. Deep diving submersibles allow scientists and explorers to visit wrecks in person, even at depths of several thousand meters, providing direct visual observation that can reveal details that sonar might miss. Satellite technology is even being used to detect possible wreck sites, as researchers have discovered that certain patterns visible in satellite imagery of the ocean surface can indicate disturbances on the seafloor, potentially including shipwrecks. While still in early stages, these techniques might eventually allow for preliminary surveys of vast ocean areas, identifying targets for more detailed investigation. Despite these technological advances, it is likely that many ghost ships will never be found. The ocean is simply too large, too deep, and too dynamic for us to search comprehensively. Wrecks in the deepest parts of the ocean, in trenches that descend 6 or 7 or 8,000 meters below the surface, are essentially beyond our reach except for the most determined and well-funded expeditions. Wrecks that sank in areas with strong currents may have broken apart and scattered across many square kilometers of seafloor, making them difficult to recognize as wreck sites even if search vehicles pass directly over them. Wooden ships that sank centuries ago may have been completely consumed by marine organisms or disintegrated, leaving nothing but scattered debris that would be nearly impossible to distinguish from the natural seafloor. These ships will remain mysteries, their exact fates unknown, existing only in historical records and in the memories we keep alive through stories and memorials. Lessons learned and future safety. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through the world's ghost fleets and vanished vessels, it is appropriate to consider what lessons have been learned from these tragedies and how maritime safety continues to evolve in response to both historical knowledge and new challenges. Every ship that has vanished, every crew that has been lost, has contributed in some way to our collective understanding of ocean dangers and how to mitigate them. While this knowledge has come at terrible cost, honoring those who were lost means ensuring that their deaths were not meaningless, that we have learned from their tragedies and taken steps to protect those who continue to venture onto the ocean. Maritime safety is never perfect and never complete, as new technologies and new types of vessels create new risks, but the overall trajectory has been toward greater safety, and this progress represents one positive legacy of the dark history we have explored. Perhaps the most fundamental lesson from maritime disasters is the importance of respect for the ocean. Humans are not marine creatures, and the ocean is not our natural environment. When we venture onto or into the water, we are visitors in a realm governed by forces far more powerful than ourselves, and survival depends on understanding those forces and operating within their limits. Overconfidence has contributed to many disasters throughout maritime history, as captains pushed too hard, departed port in questionable weather, or continued on courses that put their ships into danger, convinced that their skill or their vessel's capabilities would see them through. While confidence and determination are necessary qualities for successful mariners, they must be balanced with respect for conditions and willingness to accept that sometimes the prudent choice is to wait, to turn back, or to take a longer, safer route even if it means delays and added expense. The necessity of redundancy in critical systems is another lesson that has been reinforced repeatedly. Ships depend on propulsion, steering, navigation, and communication systems, and if any of these fail at a critical moment, the results can be catastrophic. Modern maritime regulations require that ships have backup systems for essential functions, so that a single failure does not leave the vessel helpless. Multiple power sources, backup steering systems, redundant navigation equipment, and multiple means of communication all contribute to safety by ensuring that a ship can continue to operate even if primary systems fail. While redundancy adds cost and complexity, it is justified by the lives it saves, and investigations of modern maritime disasters often find that inadequate redundancy or failure to maintain backup systems contributed to the severity of the accident. Training and qualification of crews is essential to maritime safety, as even the best-equipped ship is only as safe as the people operating her. Maritime organizations have developed increasingly rigorous training and certification requirements, ensuring that officers and crew members have the knowledge and skills needed to handle their responsibilities and to respond effectively to emergencies. Simulator training allows crews to practice emergency scenarios in safe environments, building muscle memory and decision-making skills that can be crucial when real emergencies occur. Yet training is only effective if it is maintained and updated, and if crew members are given adequate rest and reasonable working conditions, as fatigue and stress can impair judgment and reaction time even in well-trained individuals. Communication between ships and shore operations, and between vessels at sea, has proven critical to preventing disasters and improving rescue outcomes. Requirements that ships report their positions regularly, that they monitor distress frequencies, and that they respond to distress calls from other vessels create a network of mutual support that improves safety for all. The development of international standards and procedures for distress communication ensures that language differences do not impede rescue efforts, and that calls for help are understood and responded to appropriately. Modern satellite communication has made it possible for ships anywhere on Earth to send and receive messages instantly, eliminating the isolation that once characterized ocean voyages and ensuring that help can be summoned quickly when needed. Weather routing services, which provide ships with recommended routes based on current and forecast weather conditions, represent an important application of meteorological knowledge to maritime safety. Rather than following fixed routes, ships can adjust their paths to avoid storms, routing around dangerous weather systems or delaying departures until conditions improve. This flexibility requires good communication between ship and shore, accurate weather forecasting, and willingness of ship operators to accept delays when necessary for safety, but the result is significantly reduced exposure to dangerous weather and the losses that severe storms can cause. The lessons learned from maritime disasters extend beyond technical and operational improvements to include legal and regulatory frameworks that establish liability, ensure adequate insurance, and provide compensation for victims and their families. International conventions govern issues like pollution prevention, passenger safety, and search and rescue responsibilities, creating baseline standards that all maritime nations are expected to meet. While enforcement can be challenging, particularly with ships that operate under flags of convenience from nations with limited regulatory capacity, the existence of international standards creates expectations and provides frameworks for holding ship operators accountable when they cut corners or neglect safety requirements. Looking to the future, new challenges are emerging that will test our ability to maintain and improve maritime safety. Climate change is altering weather patterns and increasing the frequency and intensity of severe storms, potentially making some ocean regions more dangerous than they have been historically. Rising sea levels and changing currents may alter the risks in certain areas, requiring updates to charts and navigation recommendations. The opening of Arctic shipping routes as ice diminishes creates new opportunities for maritime commerce, but also new dangers, as vessels operate in harsh remote environments where rescue capabilities are limited. Increasing automation and the development of autonomous vessels raise questions about how safety systems and regulations need to adapt when human crews are reduced or eliminated. These challenges require ongoing attention and willingness to update our approaches as conditions and technologies change. Despite these future challenges, the overall trend in maritime safety has been positive, with death rates from maritime accidents declining significantly over the past century. Modern ships are safer, crews are better trained, weather forecasting is more accurate, and rescue capabilities are more robust than at any time in history. While ships still occasionally vanish, these events are now rare enough to be major news stories that shock the public, whereas in earlier eras they were tragically common occurrences that barely registered beyond the immediate communities affected. This progress represents the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals who have worked to understand ocean dangers and to develop technologies and practices that mitigate them. Every regulation, every safety feature, every training requirement exists because someone, somewhere, learned a lesson, often at tremendous cost, and took steps to ensure that others would not have to learn that same lesson through tragedy. Reflections on mystery and memory. As we near the end of our journey through the history of vanished ships and the treacherous waters that claimed them, it is worth reflecting on why these mysteries continue to fascinate us and what they reveal about the human relationship with the ocean. Ghost fleet stories tap into deep currents in human consciousness, connecting to ancient fears of the unknown, to our awareness of our own fragility, and to our complicated relationship with the sea that has always been both highway and barrier, source of food and source of danger, frontier to explore and force to respect. The ships that vanished into history's most dangerous waters represent all the vessels that have ever sailed, and the people who were lost represent all who have ventured onto the ocean trusting in human skill and luck to bring them home safely. There is something particularly haunting about disappearances at sea because they leave no resolution, no clear ending to the story. In other contexts, when disaster strikes, we can usually piece together what happened, can identify causes and assign responsibility, can point to the moment things went wrong and discuss what might have been done differently. But when a ship simply vanishes, taking all evidence and all witnesses with her into the depths, we are left with questions that cannot be answered with certainty. Did the crew know what was happening in their final moments? Or did catastrophe strike so suddenly that they had no time for fear or even understanding? Did anyone survive the initial disaster only to perish later, clinging to wreckage or floating in life jackets, hoping for rescue that never came? How long did hope persist before giving way to resignation? These questions haunt us because they remind us of our own mortality and the many ways that life can end suddenly and without meaning or closure. The ocean as setting for these mysteries carries its own powerful symbolism. The sea represents the unconscious in many psychological and mythological frameworks, the vast unknown depths of the mind where forgotten memories and primal fears reside. When ships disappear into the ocean, it feels almost like they have crossed from the conscious world into this deeper mysterious realm, vanishing not just physically but metaphorically, passing beyond the boundaries of what we can know and control. This symbolic resonance gives ghost fleet stories an emotional power that goes beyond simple tragedy or historical curiosity. They speak to something fundamental about human experience, our sense that beneath the surface of ordinary life lie depths we do not understand and forces we cannot control, and that any of us might at any moment cross an invisible threshold beyond which the normal rules no longer apply. Collective memory of maritime disasters serves important cultural functions in coastal communities, connecting generations and creating shared identity around common experiences and risks. The families who lost members in a disaster decades or centuries ago are connected to current residents who face similar risks, creating continuity and shared understanding that transcends individual lifetimes. The stories of lost ships become part of local folklore, passed down and embellished over time, serving both as warnings to respect the ocean's power and as reminders of the bravery of those who continue to sail despite the dangers. These stories help communities make sense of loss and risk, providing narratives that give meaning to what might otherwise feel like random tragedy. The persistence of mystery around some ship disappearances, even in our age of advanced technology and scientific understanding, reminds us that the world still contains unknowns, that not everything can be explained or measured or controlled. This can be uncomfortable for modern sensibilities that expect problems to be solvable and information to be accessible, but it can also be oddly reassuring, a recognition that the world is larger and more complex than our theories and technologies, that space remains for wonder and for the unknown. The ocean's vastness and depth ensure that it will always hold secrets, ships and sailors that vanished long ago and will never be found, stories that ended in ways we can imagine but never prove. In a world that often feels completely mapped and measured and known, these persistent mysteries remind us that profound unknowns still exist, that some questions have no answers, and that perhaps this is as it should be. The act of telling these stories, of remembering the ships and people who vanished, serves as a form of memorial in itself, keeping alive memories that might otherwise fade completely. When families of the lost no longer remain, when communities that knew these ships and sailors have themselves changed beyond recognition, the stories in books and articles and museum exhibits become the primary means by which these lives and losses are remembered. By listening to these stories, by learning about the ghost fleets and reflecting on their mysteries, we participate in an act of remembrance that honors those who were lost and acknowledges that their lives and deaths mattered, that they were not simply absorbed anonymously into history, but remain as individuals who can be known and mourned. This seems a small thing perhaps, but it is not nothing, and for those who believe that being remembered is important, these stories serve a sacred function of ensuring that the dead are not forgotten. As you listen to these stories here in the quiet hours, perhaps preparing for sleep or already drifting in that space between waking and dreams, you are participating in this tradition of memory and story, connecting yourself to a long chain of people who have wondered about the sea's mysteries and reflected on its power over human life and death. The gentle telling of these tales, the slow measured pace and calm tone we have maintained throughout this journey, invites you to think about these mysteries without alarm or distress, to consider them as part of the human story, sad and fascinating and somehow beautiful in their darkness. The ocean that claimed these ships continues to roll under the same moon and stars that witnessed their disappearance, and somewhere in the depths rest the bones of vessels and sailors, silent and forgotten by most but not by all, not as long as their stories continue to be told. A gentle closing. We have traveled together through many waters tonight, visiting regions where ships vanished and mysteries lingered, meeting the vessels and crews who sailed into history and silence. We began in the warm, infamous waters of the Bermuda Triangle, where the USS Cyclops and the Marine Sulphur Queen joined the long list of vessels that disappeared without explanation, swallowed by an ocean that left no trace of their passing. We journeyed across the world to the Dragon's Triangle and the Devil's Sea near Japan, where volcanic activity and magnetic anomalies may have claimed ships including the research vessel Ko Maru No. 5, sent to investigate the very dangers that ultimately took her. We drifted through the strange stillness of the Sargasso Sea, where sailing ships could become trapped in calm waters and floating weed, some crews dying slowly of thirst and despair as they waited for winds that never came. We faced the violent winter North Atlantic, where storms and waves and bitter cold have claimed countless vessels over the centuries, from the mysterious disappearance of the SS Warada to the more recent loss of the fishing vessel Andrea Gale in the perfect storm. We navigated dangerous straits and passages where currents and confined waters create special hazards, and we explored the Great Lakes of North America, where the mighty Edmund Fitzgerald and many others have vanished into freshwater depths, proving that one need not sail the ocean to face maritime dangers. Through all these journeys, we maintained a gentle tone and calm approach, treating these tragedies with respect and recognizing that behind each vanished vessel were human lives, families who grieved, and communities that lost members to the sea's embrace. We examined the theories that attempt to explain these disappearances, from structural failure and rogue waves to human error and extreme weather, from fires and explosions to the intriguing but unproven possibility of methane eruptions from the seabed. We acknowledged that many disappearances likely have relatively ordinary explanations that simply cannot be confirmed because the evidence went down with the ships, and that mystery does not always require exotic causes. We considered the human cost of these vanishings, the families left without closure, the communities devastated by collective loss, and the difficult grief that comes from losing someone without being able to bury them or know exactly what happened. We explored how maritime safety has evolved in response to these tragedies, how technology and regulations have made modern shipping significantly safer, and how the lessons learned from past disasters continue to inform efforts to protect those who go to sea today. We reflected on memorials and acts of remembrance, the ways communities honor their lost sailors and keep their memories alive across generations, and we considered the continuing searches for lost wrecks, driven by scientific curiosity and emotional need for closure. We thought about the symbolic power of these mysteries, the way they connect to deep psychological and cultural themes about the unknown, about mortality, about humanity's relationship with the natural world and with forces beyond our control. And throughout this journey, we have moved slowly and calmly, like a tide that rises gently on a beach, allowing ideas and stories to flow over you in waves of thought and memory, creating a space where you can reflect and feel and gradually let your mind settle toward rest. The ocean continues its eternal rhythms, caring nothing for human concerns or tragedies, indifferent to whether ships cross its surface safely or vanish into its depths. The waves that roll today follow the same patterns that existed before humans ever built vessels, and they will continue long after our ships and cities have crumbled into dust. This indifference is not cruel, merely neutral, a reminder that nature operates according to its own laws and does not adjust itself to accommodate our desires or needs. We can study the ocean, we can predict its moods to some degree, we can build ships that usually withstand its power, but we cannot control it, and we must accept that sometimes it will take ships and sailors despite our best efforts and technologies. This acceptance is not defeatism but realism, a recognition of our place in the natural world and of the fact that some risks cannot be eliminated, only mitigated and respected. Yet alongside this recognition of danger and uncertainty, we can also appreciate the beauty and majesty of the ocean, the way sunlight sparkles on waves, the deep blue of water stretching to the horizon, the sounds of surf and seabirds, the thrill of watching a ship move gracefully across the water. The ocean has always called to human beings, drawing us to explore and travel and seek our fortunes on or across the water. And this call persists despite the known dangers because the sea offers something essential, a frontier and a challenge, a sense of freedom and possibility that cannot be found on land. The sailors who vanished in the waters we have discussed tonight were answering this call, trusting in their skills and their vessels and their luck, accepting risk in exchange for adventure or livelihood or simply the deep satisfaction of working with the sea. That their voyages ended in tragedy does not diminish their courage or their lives, and remembering them means honoring not just their loss but also their choice to sail, to venture into uncertain spaces, to live in ways that put them in contact with elemental forces that most people encounter only from the safety of shore. As you let these stories and thoughts settle in your mind, as you feel the pull of sleep or the comfort of rest approaching, carry with you a sense of connection to all those who have gone down to the sea in ships throughout history. From ancient mariners in wooden boats navigating by stars and faith, to medieval sailors crossing to new worlds, to the industrial era crews aboard steam and steel vessels, to modern sailors on container ships and tankers and cruise liners, all share a common bond of having trusted themselves to the ocean's care. The vast majority complete their voyages safely, arriving in port to reunite with families and to prepare for the next journey. But some do not return, and for them we keep these stories and memories, ensuring that they are not forgotten, that their names are spoken and their sacrifices acknowledged. In the grand sweep of history, individual lives may seem small, but each person matters. Each loss leaves a hole in the world, and honoring those who were lost at sea means affirming that they were important, that their stories deserve to be told and remembered. The mysteries of the ghost fleets may never be fully solved. Technology improves and searches continue, but the ocean is so vast and so deep that many wrecks will never be found. Many questions will never be answered. We must learn to hold these mysteries gently, to accept that some things remain unknown and perhaps unknowable, and to find meaning not in solving every puzzle but in the asking of questions, in the wondering and remembering and honoring of those who were lost. The empty places at dinner tables, the silent rooms where loved ones never returned, the names on memorials overlooking harbors. These are the true legacies of the ghost fleets, reminders of cost and loss, but also of courage and the enduring human drive to venture into unknown spaces despite danger. So as we conclude this long, gentle journey through history's most treacherous waters and the ships they claimed, let yourself relax completely, feeling the comfort of your surroundings, the softness of your bed or chair, the quiet of the night around you. The stories we have shared tonight were sad in many ways, filled with loss and mystery and questions without answers. But they were also stories of bravery and adventure, of human beings living fully and facing challenges with courage. The ocean remains out there in the darkness, rolling and vast and eternal, holding its secrets in the depths where light does not penetrate and pressure is crushing. But we are here, safe and warm and quiet, remembering those who sailed and were lost, honoring their memory by keeping their stories alive, and perhaps understanding just a little better the forces and mysteries that shaped their fates. Rest easy now, let your breathing slow and your muscles relax. Let your mind drift like a ship on gentle swells, moving toward the peaceful harbor of sleep. The ghost fleets have been remembered tonight, the sailors honored, the mysteries acknowledged. Now it is time to rest, to let these stories settle into memory, and to allow yourself the comfort of sleep and the quiet peace of the night. Safe harbor, safe rest, gentle dreams.